House Democrats will always put American values over autocracy, benevolence over bigotry, the Constitution over the cult, democracy over demagogues, economic opportunity over extremism, freedom over fascism, governing over gaslighting, hopefulness over hatred.
Welcome back. In case you missed it, that was the ABCs of what House Democrats plan to fight for. On a week consumed by infighting on the Republican side, Democrats made history, formally elevating Congressman Hakeem Jeffries as their leader, the first black lawmaker to lead either party in Congress. At 52, ready for this? He is also the first lawmaker elected to lead House Democrats that was born after the end of World War II. And Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries joins me now. Leader Jeffries, welcome back to Meet the Press, and first of all, congratulations.
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning. Happy New Year.
Thank you, sir. Let me start with your take on the concessions Kevin McCarthy made in order to gain the speakership. What are the ones that concern you the most about the functionality of the House?
Well, our general concern is that the dysfunction that was historic that we saw this week is not at an end, it's just the beginning. And while the Congress was held captive this particular time, what is going to be a problem is if the American people will be held captive over the next 2 years to the extreme MAGA Republican agenda that apparently has been negotiated into the House rules and the functioning of the Congress. That's going to undermine the health, the safety, and the well-being of the American people. It may undermine national security and a robust defense, and undermine our ability to actually advance an agenda that is anchored in kitchen table pocketbook issues and not extremism.
You know, one of the things that I've noticed in Washington, no matter when an institution gets weakened, even when the party changes hands, it's sometimes hard to re-strengthen that institution. Are you concerned that should you have the good fortune of having the ability to be Speaker, that it's actually going to be hard to restore some of these powers?
No, what our concern right now is on getting things done for everyday Americans and tackling the business that is in front of us, making sure that we have a farm bill that makes sense for the American people, making sure that we actually can fund a government that invests in economic opportunity, invests in the health and the public safety of the American people, making sure that we don't default on our debt for the first time in American history, making sure that we reauthorize important agencies like the FAA so we can strengthen air travel in this country. This is the agenda that we're going to focus on as Democrats: lower cost, better paying jobs, American jobs that can be brought back to this country. And I'm very, very troubled by the way in which the Congress has started, and hopefully that doesn't portend what's to come.
Are we going to be governing by discharge petition? And I apologize to the viewers. What does that mean? It just says we're basically a handful of Republicans working with Democrats would work outside the leadership, forcing maybe a clean debt limit raise, keeping the lights on for government. Is that the reality of the next 2 years?
Well, what we've indicated from the beginning is that we are going to extend the hand of partnership to the other side of the aisle, make sure that we can find common ground whenever and wherever possible. We will oppose extremism, of course, whenever necessary. And there are Republicans who are interested in governing. And they're going to have to break from the extreme wings of their party at times around some important issues. And we'll see how that all unfolds.
Speaker Pelosi did not have a great relationship with Kevin McCarthy. What's yours?
Well, Kevin McCarthy and I have had some positive, forward-looking conversations over the last few weeks. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to build upon those conversations to do the right thing for the American people. Clearly, we are going to have strong disagreements at times, but we can agree to disagree without being disagreeable. That is what I believe the American people would like to see in terms of a functional House, a functional Senate, a functional government. I look forward to building upon the Biden agenda, tremendous accomplishments from the American Rescue Plan to the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, to gun safety legislation for the first time in 30 years, the CHIPS and Science Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, and moving the country forward. And if Kevin McCarthy is willing to try to find common ground in that regard, they will find willing partners amongst House Democrats.
You know, a 5-seat House majority is the equivalent of arguably a 1-seat or the 50-50 Senate. I mean, it is that narrow. If you thought you could find 5 Republicans to support you or the Democrats and it actually changed the majority, would you pursue looking for 5 party switchers?
We are going to pursue an agenda that protects the public interest, that ensures economic opportunity in every corner of America, that builds upon the moment that we're in. We have an inflationary environment, of course, that we continue to fight. And let me point out, Chuck, Republicans spent months saying that they were going to fight inflation. They came to Washington and spent their first week fighting each other. What we need to do is fight for everyday Americans. That is what we are going to try to do as we move forward as House Democrats. And we look forward to trying to find some reasonable Republicans who are willing to break from the extreme elements of their conference to do the business of the American people.
But you're not necessarily looking for any of them to switch parties and put you in the Speaker's office.
We're dealing right now with a Republican majority that is narrow, a House that is evenly divided, and that is going to require bipartisan cooperation. It doesn't mean unconditional surrender. Democrats are always going to stand behind our principles, but we are willing to find common ground, to fight for the things that the American people care about: lower cost, better paying jobs, safer communities, being right at the top of the list.
I want to ask you about a couple of issues. President Biden is headed to the border today. Is going to have some meetings with the presidents of Canada and Mexico. But I'm curious what you think of his new border policies, expanding Title 42 to asylum seekers from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, the third country asylum rule. There'll be a new pathway for some migrants, but Title 42 will still be there and the transit ban will still be there. How do you feel about these decisions?
Well, I look forward to hearing what President Biden has to say later after his communications. I do think that the Biden administration is trying to tackle a tough issue in a way that is consistent with both the principle that America is a nation of immigrants, that gorgeous mosaic of people from across the world who come here to pursue the American dream has been a part of American excellence, but also, of course, making sure there's a safe and a secure and a strong border. Now, with respect to Title 42, it's my understanding that the Biden administration is bound by some court decisions and are working through that. We'll see what the judicial process leads to. But at least as it relates to the Democratic side of the aisle, we look forward to having a positive, forward-looking, positive discussion. We're not going to try to weaponize the issue for political gain, as some of my colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle clearly would like to do.
Before I let you go, you're the first African-American to lead a party in Congress. What does that mean to you? What does that mean to the country?
Well, I look forward to doing the best possible job, to staying focused, to getting things done. But I do think that it is another data point on the journey in America, which is we are a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that means that folks from a working class neighborhood in central Brooklyn like myself should have an opportunity to participate in American governance, particularly in the House of Representatives, which is the institution designed to be the closest to the people. And we're proud of the fact, as House Democrats, that we are one of the most diverse caucuses in American history, truly reflecting the hopes, the dreams, and the aspirations, and as the framers would say, the passions of the American people in the most authentic way possible. And I'm proud to be a part of that team.
You just helped preview a data download I will have later in the show that shows how Congress, how reflective is this Congress of the American population. Hakeem Jeffries, the new leader of the Democratic Party in the House. Again, congratulations, and I appreciate you coming on, sharing your views.
Thank you, Chuck.